welcome to our afternoon panel session. It is called Respect the Work, which is about copyright and ethics in real arts careers. Before we get started, I want to put the caveat that I see on many other professional developments about this topic, that we are not lawyers. Not lawyers. We are not giving legal advice. We are not giving any sort of directive for anyone's specific situation. Today's conversation is going to be rooted in stories and where copyright and ethics show up in our daily lives, in careers, but also as artists. Each of our guests today is a practicing artist, and we want this conversation to feel more like a living room conversation than a panel. So we hope that you got that from the set. But the idea is that copyright and ethics, which are in the new standards, are not necessarily about just like compliance and rules and teaching kids like these technical nuances. It's something that actually relates to the everyday experience of artists, whether it's giving credit or remixing, licensing, being inspired by another artist, or the way that we distribute art to our friends. We want to make sure that we're teaching our kids to do that with ethical behavior. So before we go further, I'd like to introduce our friends on the stage today. The first one we have is Eileen Chang, who is the marketing director of the North Carolina Arts Council. And she works every day with artists to make sure that they are seen and they are credited. And she is also a graphic designer herself. Beside her is Erica Patton, who is an actor and amateur licensing rep at Music Theater International. If you are a theater teacher, you know who MTI is, for sure. All right. He helps schools and community theaters navigate the sometimes rather confusing world of theater licensing, and he has helped me immensely as well. On my left here, we have Michelle Harrell, which many of you already know. She is from the Museum of Art and is a working artist and a museum educator who guides teachers through all sorts of different uses of arts education, or art works. And finally, we have Anthony Kelly, who is a composer. In fact, he is the composer in residence for the North Carolina Symphony, and he is also a Duke professor whose work explores originality, influence, and fair use in music. So, now that you know who's in the room, we're going to go ahead and listen to their stories. Eileen, you shared with me earlier a story about how you were celebrating artists across the state, and you know what it takes to make sure that their work is seen and celebrated. But it's also easy to overlook some of their contributors. Can you share a little bit about a moment where that mattered?
Thank you, Eric. So I think a lot of times any given project can involve so many different collaborators, and it's incredibly easy, despite our best intentions, to overlook someone. But I do think it's always important to give credit where it's due and shout out our collaborators and give them credit no matter how small that contribution you may think it is. And the thing that you were referring to earlier, we've been running a blog and website series on our through email newsletters, and also on our website, called Portraits and Resilience. And it's a series where we highlight and spotlight artists, specifically working artists in Western North Carolina, who may have been impacted by Hurricane Helene. And it's a series of interviews done by my colleague Andy Freeman, showcasing a community that's really in need, showcasing artists that are in need, and it's a way to lift up their work, but it's also a way to kind of get an insight into the state of things in Western North Carolina, the state of the art sector, how a catastrophe like Hurricane Helene impacts a community, etc. And so many of the artists that we featured a bunch of them already. A lot of them are visual creators. We've done some potters, we have a glass blower, we have someone who makes brooms, just lots of different visual artists.
Did you say brooms?
Yes, brooms.
That's awesome.
Yes, she hand makes, I think one of our artists, she hand makes these really wicked looking brooms. But so especially, I think a lot of us, especially those who work in any sort of 3D medium, knows that 3D mediums are something that's, unless you're a photographer or somebody who does printmaking, but 3D, having a good portfolio of images of your 3D work is super important. But a lot of times in profiles, like we see the work, we see the pots, and we forget that the effort that we may actually need a really skilled studio photographer to frame a piece of work to really make it come to life on the screen or in a piece of printed matter, and that person, their creative contribution is there too, and that happened. So something where we missed unintentionally, again, best intentions, unintentionally overlook someone. Was in this piece behind me, and it's a profile we did a couple months ago on studio artist Judson Garrard and I think Sally Morgan Garrard. They're a couple, and you can see they work in very different mediums. And there's the broom.
That's the broom.
That's the broom. She's hand waving it. The North Carolina Arts Council is a state arts agency, and we have a lot of partners in the community. We give grants to people. So we want to hold ourselves to these really high standards because we want to be role models for our partners. So we want to do the right thing. And we have a lot of training on how to do the right thing. We know better. We really do care. But sometimes like little things like this, despite best efforts, like things still slip through. So we had done this extensive process, interviewing folks, vetting, revetting, copy editing, double, triple checking, all the things. Only for us to publish the article, and a day later, one of the artists wrote back and said, we missed somebody. We forgot to credit our studio artist in this lovely profile that you did of us, which is great. And if you look at the images, I think especially of the glass work, the glass sculpture here, without the studio artist really taking the time to offset it in a dark, dramatic background, that image, the artistry of this piece of sculpture wouldn't stand out so much. So that sort of the folks in the background who contribute in however small ways sometimes can just get overlooked really through, everybody has the best intentions. And it was not that big of a deal. We all fixed it, but it was just like a nice cascading bit of like mild embarrassment all around. Everybody was slightly embarrassed that they overlooked something seemingly so basic, but that was a sort of a moment of, oh, it's something so simple, something so basic. How could we have overlooked it? Do we need to re-examine our workflow? Is it something that we should always think to ask without assuming that a photo needs to be credited? And
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes back to my own practice as a graphic designer. The folks, especially those of us who work in really, I want to say, utilitarian fields where our work is functional. We make flyers, we take product photos or sculpture photos. We make a brochure. People use it. People see it. They don't necessarily think about the labor and the creative work that goes on behind the scenes. Our names don't appear anywhere on a brochure because it's the content that matters. And so, anyways, it was just a moment of like, I would like to be credited too, and I know I always feel really, really thankful whenever somebody gives me credit on any project. So again, it was just a moment of like, there are so many people behind the scenes that we don't always see and don't always notice, that don't always get a byline. So taking that moment to acknowledge and thank them and seek them out, I think it's always important. Sorry,
No, that's great. I actually really like the phrase cascading embarrassment. That was awesome. I like that. Eric, you had a similar, not cascading embarrassment moment early on in your career. Could you tell us about how important it is about, that behind the scenes kind of maybe invisible work that needs to be credited?
Right, yeah. So I was an actor in New York when I graduated, and as a young burgeoning, I guess, sort of professional, my colleagues and I, and cohorts as my survival job, decided to put on this cabaret review, if you will, which is a great idea, and we did. And I thought, I'm going to have my best friend, his wife, was also an up-and-coming music writer and lyricist for theater, and I was like, I'm going to ask her if I can sing one of her songs. I've heard her work, it's great. I did, and he was like, yeah, let me check on that for you. She calls me, and she says, I heard you want to do this. I think it's great. Here's the song, and I put it in the key, your key. And I thought that was so great, above and beyond. Didn't have to do that. She gave me the verbal permission. I didn't have to pay her royalties. She didn't ask me anything like that. So the performance goes on. He comes, my friend. She could not make it. And afterwards, he was like, that was really good. You did great. One thing, you didn't put her name. You didn't put her name in the little pamphlet, the little handout you gave me. I was cringe. Just my stomach fell out, and it was just to me. I was too busy. I was thinking about other things, and not only was I representing myself to possibly industry professionals, I was representing her and her work as a new upcoming artist, and it was a big lesson for me to give credit to everybody, like you said, and the person taking the photographs, the person who does a doodle on the pamphlet. Everyone needs the credit because you never know who's going to be in the room to see who's putting their stuff out there and taking notice of their work. But the joke's on me because now she is a Tony-winning score writer and lyricist, and I could have had something that said I performed her piece before she was who she became. And now I don't have that. So joke's on me. But I learned my lesson there.
That's awesome. As you were saying that for the first time, even though we've talked about these stories, I was thinking about there's a new standard that I think is in middle school, and it talks about the legal and ethical behaviors and how something can be legal but unethical. Something could be both illegal and unethical. Something being illegal but ethical is always a hard thing to wrap your mind around, but I think that you just illustrated it perfectly. Like, you had verbal permission, and not necessarily that it was illegal, but someone who follows a similar thing could be taken or challenged to pay royalties or something, especially since they did not credit. So
I was very fortunate that it was a friend, and he didn't rat me out to his wife in the moment. I don't think she knows to this day, which is a blessing. But it was good that I learned that lesson from someone close to me. And like you said, you never know when someone can come back and say, "Hey, I heard you did my thing out there and got some buzz. Where's my money?"
Yeah, and now your whole gig is just like helping other teachers do that, right? And you had an early experience about like where the line was about like how much content or which content you can use. Can you tell everybody that story?
Sure, of course. When I've sussed it out now, I was 16 doing a community theater production of Damn Yankees. And there's me, 16-year-old me, a lot of hair and years ago. And I was early in the rehearsals, and I had gone and seen in Toronto, Jerry Lewis was doing a revived version of the show. And he was the devil, and it was phenomenal, as you can imagine. And it was kind of a reimagining of the piece, and they added this song in that was called the Blooper Ballet. And if you don't know the story, it's about this really bad baseball team, and the star comes in, makes a deal with the devil, and he comes and saves the team, essentially. And they did this song called the Blooper Ballet, where you're meeting the baseball team for the first time, and they're fumbling, you're just seeing how bad they are to this silly music, very comical. But that's not in the original work, so I saw that. 16-year-old me said, "Yes, let's do that. We should do that." So I took it back to my director and I said, "Hey, I just saw this. I think we should add this in." And the sweet man, he said, "Oh, honey." That's when you know. A lesson is coming. He said, "Oh, honey, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we've only been given the rights to do the show as it appears in the script and score, and it's the 1955 version, and that's all we have the permission to do. Even if you find," so I thought that the scripts came in the mail, and you just, if you had a creative idea, you just went with it, right? But that was a big smack in my face, and probably my first experience learning anything about licensing, that you got to respect what the authors and or their estate have asked you to present in that moment. So that was my kind of first sight into licensing and giving the proper respect to what's out there currently for these shows.
And now it's every day.
Every day, every single day.
Awesome. Michelle, we're going to pivot to you. So you've been on both sides of this, both as an artist whose work has been overused, and then or used a whole lot, I should say, and then as someone who is helping teachers navigate how to use copywritten or copyrighted artwork. So can you speak a little bit to how that affects both sides of things?
Yes, so sometimes the lessons learned become like a teachable moment, and you know that you've got them when you've got a student that was in your class and they come back and they validate something you taught them to your current students.
Yes.
So like during the early 2000s, I taught computer graphics at Southeast Raleigh High School right up the street. And there was a lot of conversation about copyright then because it was the Digital Millennial Copyright Act. And I had shared how just a few years before that, I was a student at ECU, and a friend of mine worked for the newspaper. Saw some of my sketches from around town. I do lots of sketches. I'm not an illustrator or a graphic designer. But he was like, you know what, I'm looking for one of the sports complexes in downtown Greenville is looking for someone to sketch this whole complex from like a bird's eye view. You think you can pull that off? And like we seriously, 50 seconds, started sketching and playing around. So I did a sketch that I think I might have gotten 50, maybe $100 at the time. Felt really good. My name wasn't on it, but it really wasn't about me. It wasn't a finished piece of mine. So I felt pretty good. Then it kept appearing in the newspaper, kept appearing, and then it was slightly altered. And so I shared this story with my students who, I think it was about 7 or 8 years after this drawing was first published.
Wow.
They brought back, because I had a drawing then, I don't have it anymore, but they brought back one of these newspapers, and they were still using the same drawing, slightly edited, different line quality, so evidently some tracing, some different edits. So the conversation that we could have in the classroom was not only about learning how to protect my work and to be able to have some agreement. There had not been any agreement when I went back and I was like, well, that wasn't that kind of work. And I could have pushed it at the time, but it was actually more valuable to me to understand protecting my work, but then the conversation with our students. What do you do when you are given a sketch and they're like, well, I just want you to modify this. If you could just trace this, you don't have to, do your own drawing. Just
Right.
like, what are our responsibilities to respect and honor other artists' work? And, Eric's talking about like naming them. But both of you talk about just our names to them, but also the work itself and finding out who are these, well, even if we don't know the name of the artist, who are them? And what's our responsibilities? That's that fine line between what's ethical and what's legal.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the most famous examples of using someone else's work is Shepard Fairey's Hope poster, right? We have a picture of it. You all are familiar with this, right? Can you talk a little bit about how this walks that line?
So, and Shepard Fairey is intentionally using appropriation, and he has, if you look up Shepard Fairey, there's some beautiful videos that are short that you could share with your students and hear from the artists themselves talking about this work. But this work references, in fact, right now, just in the past couple of weeks, there's been another appropriation of the Obama Hope poster that has been sparked into conversation for the use of colors and everything for, shall I say, appropriating it against the artist's intention of how this image was meant to be used as a referencing red, white, and blue images. So Shepard Fairey is using appropriation because we recognize images as language. We are literate as a society. So he's learning how to take images that we recognize and to be able to appropriate them as a form of language that you're speaking. So it's important to understand copyright, but then to understand how artists today are pushing this line as part of the expression of our visual culture today, that we have memes that, if I said 6, 7, come on, everyone knows exactly. I'm sorry. I am sorry for the educators in the audience. That our students are exposed to culture and are able to pull culture that you can say very little. You can play very little from a song. You can show very little of an image and reduce it down to abstraction, and we understand what the meaning is that we're conveying. So that's a very powerful language that you have at your disposal. Understanding, navigating laws around that is another conversation. And some of this was involved in some legal controversy.
Yeah.
So
It's really interesting because each of the 4 arts areas even have a different opinion and approach to what might be called appropriation in each of them. I know that I have learned that even though as a jazz musician I'm encouraged to steal, trying to take someone else's choreography and put it on stage is a giant no-no in a way that is not similar to arranging or improvising or stealing in the music world. So visual arts has its own way of approaching that as well. But Anthony, you have a great story about crossing that line between inspiration into what comes after that?
You talking about the young man?
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah, I worked with the Richmond Symphony as composer in residence there for 4 years. And near the end of that run, we had, I had 4 extraordinary young people who I encouraged to write music for the orchestra. And I thought, what a nice occasion to have an 8-year-old, 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, have music played live for everybody. One of the youngest of them, an 8-year-old named David, he had written a piece inspired by a comic book, The Flash. There's a character called Grodd. There's a gorilla named Grodd in that comic book. He's a psychic gorilla. Why am I telling you all this? Anyway, but it really inspired David. And he wrote a piece, and it's very interesting, and it was great orchestral music. And I was as excited as he was about the piece. But I said, listen, let's go through the proper channels, and you need to write to DC Comics and ask for their permission. Because this is going to be a public event, and we don't want the Richmond Symphony name pulled down in some kind of snafu related to copyright. And I was also thinking, what executive at DC Comics is going to turn down an 80-year-old's letter? That's great. That's not going to happen, right? And it did. Oh yeah, you hear how they react?
Yeah, oh, I know.
Like he showed me the letter, and my heart just sunk. And I'll tell you, it sunk. But I said, boy, did both of us learn a lot. And also, there's a little touch of my understanding. They were protecting their creative and intellectual property, which we all have the right to do, which I have the right to do with my work, which everybody up on this stage and all of you out there who are creative in any way have the right to do. So I do understand that protection. So he did a workaround. He made it based on another character who was menacing, and it worked out fine. The music was still played; it was beautiful. But I thought that was a really great moment for a very young person and for his older mentor to have learned.
Yeah, that's great. Now, what about your intellectual property compared to Mary Lou Williams?
Okay, all right. And I'm going to tell you something else on that. I wrote a piano concerto for the same orchestra that has a quotation of music by Franz Joseph Haydn in it. But I knew that it was safely in the bounds of what the copyright law would be. I also credit in the score, and I write in the program notes, this is from Haydn's Farewell Symphony. So everybody knows. And we are talking here about courtesy, really.
Right, yeah. Ethical
just
kindness.
Of and David had put Grodd into the piece, we would have said this was DC Comics Grodd. So it's not like we were going to violate that. I just think our society is so used to borrowing such things so often that people forget to go through those proper channels sometimes. But I don't think it's always malicious. I don't think so. So anyway, about my own work, I was working with Mary Lou Williams' last composition. She was writing for the Duke Wind Symphony, and I found scraps, sketches, but the piece was never finished. So I was like, I gotta finish this piece and get it done. And we got it. I was putting it together, and as I was beginning to assemble it, I wrote to the Mary Lou Williams Foundation, which covers her, rights and royalties, and I never heard back from them. 4 months later, I'm still working. Never heard back from them. I finished the piece. We get the piece before. And they finally start hearing a buzz online that this piece is starting to get some legs. So they're like, oh, we need to have a talk. So, just know that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect are not necessarily as responsible as they need to be in corresponding. So just know that, you make your best effort. And then when the conversation time comes, you can have that conversation.
That's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned the Haydn piece, and I feel like that's a great place to bring up talking about fair use, right? So fair use, or the Haydn piece, would be in the public domain because it's more than 70 years ago that he wrote it. But these 4 are the bullet points that help guide the use of fair use. And this isn't necessarily like commit these to memory, kids, but it's sort of, like you said, guiding students to start making decisions that are guided by ethical and kind and courteous behavior. And these are not even necessarily yes or no questions or like there's a threshold. All of these things are are actually sort of weighed and considered in a court of law. And you've actually been an expert witness, right?
I have been an expert witness in a hip hop lawsuit, and that was fun because I got to get music theory nerdy about some things that they were just using as they wished. And the people getting sued, I was on the end of the people who were suing. No, correction. I remember at the time, one hip hop group had claimed that they had given a mixtape to someone who became really famous with another song. I was on the Sony corporate end of things, so the evil corporation. But they were protecting the fact that a lot of the music that was happening in this hugely famous piece was happening through sort of like common practice of hip hop. Like it was in 4/4 time. You can't sue. You can't sue in 4/4 time.
4 on the floor is public domain, man.
You see, there's so many things that I was able to prove empirically were part of like the normal use in music. That we find that sometimes as you've got those questions, we find that every single one of these cases is decided on a case-by-case basis still in the courts if it's ever taken in court. It's not like they just kind of have a rubber stamp and they say you have failed or you have succeeded. You actually have to gradually make those arguments based on what's there. So during those days of being an expert witness, I got to sort of compete with other expert witnesses about the specifics of whether an oscillating D to C on quarter note beats is common practice or not. And I was able to pull up enough examples to show even Beethoven did that.
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of fun about the musical aspects of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know that copyright is written to try to encourage creativity, but also to protect the creative property of whoever created it. So it's really hard to be it's easy to say the bad corporate guys, but they are protecting the work of the people who are actually, or who created that in the first place. But where was I going to go with this? Oh no, I remember. But it's sometimes, it's not all cloudy days. The sunshine and rainbow is that there is a lot in the public domain, and there is a lot that can be used, especially in educational settings by students, that falls underneath this fair use area. And Eileen, I think you shared with us the other day that there's some amazing public domain resource that you love?
Yeah, I think the one that I was talking about was a public domain review, and it's this really great free online magazine that does a historical deep dive into a lot of great resources and material that's out there in the public domain. It's a little bit, it reminds me of Atlas Obscura, but for really cool historical facts, old botanical illustrations, and these are all images, resources, material that are available. I think most of them are under the Creative Commons license, so it's available for folks to borrow, modify, and again, you do have to make sure to read the Creative Commons license that's there to make sure that...
I'm going to interrupt you. Can you talk a little bit about what Creative Commons licenses are?
Yeah, so I think again, I'm definitely not an expert about this, but from a graphic designer's point of view, there's this really great set. I think Creative Commons, I believe, is a nonprofit organization, and they come up with this set of ready-to-go, ready-made licenses for creative work, and a lot of this there's built into it is a lot of flexibility for sharing, for remixing, for using, but sort of royalty-free. So without that, it's really great for folks who are just looking for free images, things on a budget, as long as you built into the license. A lot of times it'll say, use with credit, use with a source acknowledgement, use only in personal uses, or there's the stipulations in there, but it's free, and a lot of times there's a lot of flexibility. And I think Creative Commons licenses, the materials are in all sorts of mediums. There's images from museums, there's folks' personal photos, archives, there's videos, there's music, all sorts of things are are available under the Creative Commons license. And Public Domain Review is a really great magazine, but also I think, so I used to work at university libraries, and libraries love to create resource guides. And if you just do a quick Google search, you'll find a lot of resources. Search for Creative Commons as a keyword, search for open source images. There will be a lot of resource guides out there. I know MIT has one, I think, and it just lists, all the museums across the world who open up the collection of images for educators, for anyone to use, remix, and download as they need it. There's Pexels, there's Unsplash, there's so many things out there, but so oftentimes they're collected in universally LibGuide. So if you do a Google search for keywords Creative Commons and open source images, you can find a lot of those. You can also use Google, just do a Google search, and there's actually an image filter you can use to filter down your image searches to just display those with Creative Commons licenses, and that is a sort of fast, easy way to find images that you can safely grab and use without having to worry about running into issues of payment, royalty, copyright infringement, and that sort of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then if you aren't familiar with Creative Commons licenses, they are free to acquire as well. So if you and your students start in the practice of putting or choosing a Creative Commons license, if it's something that they are happy to share, that's great. One of the things that we're going to touch on social media in a minute, but a lot of platforms where you upload your art, whether it is a dance move or on TikTok, or if it's something that you've posted to YouTube or some other emerging platforms, then you've got to be careful, because some of those things have built-in Creative Commons licenses, and it's like when you agree to upload this video or picture of whatever, or audio file of whatever it is, to share it with the world, it becomes open source. It becomes public domain, free use, and you are no longer allowed to claim it or to claim royalties. So it's really important for our students to understand how to protect their own work, especially when they have a means of putting it out into the world in just 30 seconds. We're going to move away from cringe moments, and we're going to go to some more deeper themes. So, Michelle, if you have one key takeaway from working at the museum regarding using or posting other teachers' work, artists' work, that you would want to make sure all teachers impart on their students, what would that be?
So there's lots of layers to that. Maybe taking a step back and talking about like the process because fair use and public domain also have like a lot of other. There's a lot of nuance to this, and I'm sure as someone that's teaching this is constantly changing. So when a work of art comes into the museum's collection, when it's acquired, in that acquisition report, the artist notes the license that's allowed. By default, we ask for a non-exclusive license so that we can sell that work of art on mugs royalty-free. We can publish it anywhere that we want to. But most contemporary artists will sort of pull back and give us a negotiation of, well, that would be a separate request. So this is who holds the copyright and what would be included in fair use. But also have to say that when I first came into the museum, we had never started in 2010. We had never done online courses. And online courses made things a little bit more complicated because technically we say that education is fair use. But even before 2010, I had teachers, we didn't have teachers pay teachers then, but teachers were making money off of their lesson plans and finding that sometimes whenever you don't know where the work of art came from, you're not able to credit it, they got into some sticky situations then. So I was aware of just being careful with things. As a professional, I'm teaching something one day, I need to know where things come from. So our online courses, we started acquiring the permissions because we could get into a thing, and this came from our partners, North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, to make sure that all of our credits and our licensures are in there and that we go and we ask. So if it is an artist that I think the one sort of space that we end up having to pay every year that's on our budget line for our endowments are the artists that have passed away, but their estates are being managed by a clearinghouse that manages artists. So you see a lot of abstract expressionists, 30s, 40s, 50s work that we have to pay to be able to use their work in something else because it's still managed by someone. So most contemporary artists have been very easy to work with in giving that, or they'll state that Hank Willis Thomas was one of a pleasure to work with. I could email him personally and give permission. Sometimes you're working with agents. So I think that learning to just be aware of what are the licensures, be aware, but also balance that with a level of knowing what you can create spoofs for to be able to be creative in the classroom. Giving them permission to appropriate, giving them a little bit of licensure and asking them to push that edge to what's acceptable. One of the examples that I actually, self-promotion for the museum. Some of you met some of my colleagues outside, Kristen and Jill, who were sharing some things about our upcoming exhibition, which is including work by Rembrandt, public domain, fair use. So here our graphic design team, Allison, Lori, were able to be so much more creative by taking these works of art that were in the public domain and be able to cut them. They actually took, sorry, I should have included this as an image. They actually took a swivel pattern that was on one of the Judaic silverware pieces, and they used that as the imagery and then did these fun cutouts. Cool. I've seen Rembrandt's paintings 1,000 times, but I tell you, this is fun. It makes me want to look a little bit more closely. So I think that there's the balance of understanding that balance and being aware, being thoughtful, being respectful, but then also encouraging play, encouraging, to beg, borrow, steal, sight, but also push the limits as well. So I think that courage to do both.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, when I heard like Rembrandt's coming again, I was like, okay, but seeing those images, I'm like, oh, this feels like a new twist on it. And there's something really cool about having the license to play with someone else's stuff that's so well known and old and recast it in a new light. And it's totally okay because it's in the public domain. It's free.
And just saying it can also be an artistic expression. So just if we wanted to like unpack and critique this, it lets you just look at the subject, which is Esther, looking at Rembrandt's work. You know Rembrandt's work, but looking at it and isolating just for the woman that's depicted as the thread through this exhibition. What is her story? So it does give you a different filter. So being able to take, appropriate, twist, turn, remix allows you to bring light to the original work as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, Michelle, you mentioned teachers pay teachers and finding works online. I'm going to pivot to Eric. What do you say to any teacher, whether it's an ELA teacher or a theater teacher who says, but I found the script online for free?
I'm sure you did. Which version, right? There's so many things just floating around out there, right? I get the question probably 2 or 3 times a year. Hey, I just had a conversation. I just want to get the rights, right? I just want to buy the royalties, so the author gets paid. Okay, good, check, that's good. But I don't need all those materials that you send. Which I get where it's coming from, because materials in our world are probably the biggest thing you're paying for. And I said, okay, well, how are you planning to do the show without materials? Oh, I found it online. Okay. Or I did it 6 years ago, and I still have all the materials. So I told this gentleman in particular, can you send me what you found? He did. And then I sent him back just a copy of the first 2 pages of the script. I think it was Annie Jr. And I just highlighted about 12 to 15 differences that he had from what we licensed. And I said, this is why you have to buy materials, because this is the current version, 2025, that the author's estate have approved, like my damn Yankee story. That's what you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to do some old version of the show or a new creation that I wanted to do when I was 16 years old. And so I sent that back to him, and 9 times out of 10 that suffices. Okay, I get it, yes, okay, sure. But that also points out that with theater art in particular, that it's always changing. So we constantly have content updates and material updates because maybe there's a revival of a show and the authors or their estates like this moment, or they've heard feedback that a joke that killed in 1975 isn't landing right in 2025. So
Shocking.
right, believe it or not. So they've changed the language, or they've changed this joke, or they wanted to add an option where they're hearing, this is a little more adult for what we need. Is there a swap that we can do? So there's constantly updates happening to the work, and I love that because it's evolving, right? It's changing with us and times, but that does require you to buy the materials every time, and not save that money, unfortunately. But I do love that it's constantly evolving and changing, and that's how we are sure that we're getting. If you wrote Hamilton and you spent 15 to 20 years writing that, wouldn't you want it to be presented as you wrote it for 15 years? So you're respecting the work, essentially, and all the time to read it and what they're approving. At the end of the day, we're there to protect the authors and their vision. So while we're the bad guys sometimes, like the evil corporation maybe, that's why we exist in the first place, is to protect the author and their visions.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about, as an audience, so I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest Ballet puts on, or used to put on, the Maurice Sendak version. And if you don't know the Maurice Sendak version, it's wild. I grew up thinking that there was a peacock in the second act, and there was a wild thing who danced, and that the Traycock dance was a whole bunch of Arabian dancing men doing like crazy turns and such. And the first time I saw the real version, I was like, "Where's the peacock?" Right? And it turns out that only the Pacific Northwest Ballet did this. And when Sendak passed away, his estate actually said no more, and so they're not allowed to do that version anymore. And they do the standard version of Candyland. As a viewer, I interpreted the Nutcracker as the way that I had seen it, and I thought that all other versions were weird, right? And so if somebody saw some pared down version of Hamilton done by 16-year-olds, they might go, well, that wasn't as good, or it didn't land, or it's not as meaningful as everybody makes it out to be. So it is really important to present with fidelity.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to also say, going off what you said, our authors, it's a very case-by-case basis what you can do, and some of our authors are very open to edits to their work, to new ideas being implemented in their works, just because they want the work out there and they want the students or the community to experience it and get the message, but they may say, let me know the feedback so I can interpret it as an artist and see if I want to make any changes. But then we also have authors who say, if you can't do it exactly as it's written, I would rather you do something else. And that's their prerogative as the author. Because, like a Mel Brooks show, if you have to edit it down to take out all the offensive stuff,
what would you be left with?
Exactly. What is left? So I get it from that point of view too, but it's sometimes a case-by-case basis. And but there are some freedoms from time to time.
Yeah, that's good. So keeping on this theme of sharing on the internet, Aileen, could you deal with especially digital content out there? How can we encourage our kids to share things responsibly in this age of InstaTalk and Snapagram?
I think it's kind of a lot of what everybody has talked about, especially Michelle talking about the idea of there's so much resources and information at our fingertips now. We have the freedom to remix, reshare, chop things up, and sort of put them together in ways that no one has ever seen them before. And we can still do that responsibly on the internet as long as we give credit. And I think a lot of these big platforms like Facebook and Instagram, there's built-in reshare and remix features. I feel like there's an acknowledgement from these companies too that this is the way we use information. We're going to take it and make it our own, but we can do that. We can all do that responsibly. And so I think if folks just use the built-in tools that are already there, and also really lean into this idea of collaboration and sort of working together. Collaboration is a good thing. Acknowledge your idols, acknowledge the folks that you have borrowed from, because if you're collaborating, you're getting the sort of the audience of both of the, not only yourself, but the people that you're working with. So really, I think leaning into that idea is not a bad thing. It's sort of borrowing but stealing little credit, working together, collaboration. There's a lot of room to play, and leaning into that is actually a great thing. And there's so many tools that are already built in the platforms to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We were talking, I think, last time about how a lot of those platforms even provide opportunities for our students or young composers or young artists to be able to get their work as one of those options, and actually then be paid, of course, a fraction of a penny every time that it's used. But they're paid for their work and they're credited for their work. And I love what you were saying about collaboration. If it feels more like a collaboration, then of course you want to cite your friend, right? You want to say like, hey, shout out to this person who's doing an amazing job. So I love that framing of it.
And also, I think in a day and age where it's like you don't want to wait until you get called out for something. You don't want to wait until like, hey, actually, this looks really familiar. It looks like something that I did. You don't want to wait until you're kind of in that phase of public shaming to realize that you need to give people credit for things. So I think again, like just being mindful, and it's something that I think you kind of have to be vigilant and mindful. You kind of have to build it into the work, the way you create, the way you think, the way you share. It should be built in from the ground up. It's not something that you can think about sort of after the fact. It's something it should be done at the very beginning from the get-go.
I love that, and that's sort of the purpose of our new through line, is that it's just baked in. So many people are probably already teaching their kindergartners not to copy each other's work. That's literally the kindergarten standard. What's your work? What's somebody else's work? And do we copy it? But let's keep going on this idea of remixing and being inspired. Anthony, where do you draw the line between originality, arrangement, inspiration, and like doing something that you're crossing the line?
Okay, that's a
I know,
really complicated question.
You got this.
Yeah. Can I just kind of back up again?
Absolutely.
I like what you were just saying. I mean, we're the grown-ups, okay? We can just say to young people that, plagiarism is criminal. We can just say that. They should say it to us. I don't know, just because there's a lot of remixing going on, I don't know that we need to advocate that responsibility as the grown-ups.
I love that you just used the word plagiarism, because I think the broader community, like education community, understands where that line is of plagiarism. And what we're talking about here is artistic plagiarism.
Right. And so, whereas I do enjoy the idea of transforming what has come to us from the past, which is fine, and that's why something like Creative Commons is a great idea. By the way, I brought a Creative Commons product. This book is a Creative Commons book and has the 2 C's in the first page, which is kind of like the opposite of the iconic 1C copyright.
I'm just looking at the front cover. I feel like I need this book.
Yeah, it's a great, and it's made by the Center for the Study of Public Domain at Duke, where I co-taught a class on intellectual property and music. And these people are specialists. The woman, Jennifer Jenkins, has a brand new book out on music copyright. So look out for Jennifer Jenkins' book. It's already out. Oxford University Press put it out. And it's about all the stuff we're talking about, but really from a legal standpoint. So they put this together with cartoons, and they even have a little character that's supposed to be kind of like me, except he's got hair. That's the deal really quick. So all this is going on because they are encouraging the generation of new material by virtue of what has been bequeathed to us, which is kind of what you were talking about. But we gotta come back to something else. I say to my students, yeah, it's cool to be someone who's sampling someone else, but wow, is it amazing to be the sample?
Yeah.
That's what I remind them, is that there's a value to shock people with originality. And if you don't do it with something that's completely new that you think or other people would discern as completely new, at least make the thing you're borrowing virtually unrecognizable in how you would borrow it. That's what I usually encourage my students to do if they're doing music. just transform it and surprise us. So that we're like, oh, I didn't even know that was in there, but there it is.
Yeah.
So that's usually my method of teaching.
That's great. I was thinking about how, so many of our kids are already engaged in some of these conversations because they're in the media, right? We know about the Ed Sheeran case. We know about the Taylor Swift case. We know about Shepard Fairey. Like, these sorts of things pop up because it's part of pop culture. And, now we're talking about parody, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. I know that there was someone who specifically went through and asked AI, what are all the rhythmic variations of the way that I can break out a rhythm, so that he put it all in open source, Creative Commons stuff, so that no one can sue over it anymore. So that's kind of powerful to be like, hey, this belongs to everyone now, since it's all just mathematical and rhythmic in that way. But wow, that's amazing. And so our time has come to an end. And I just wanted to thank you all for being here and asking your questions. A huge shout out to our amazing guests today. Round of applause for them. And hopefully from these conversations, we can just really recognize that copyright and ethical conversations happen not just when you're a licensing specialist or a marketing work in marketing, or when you're dealing with sharing artworks or inspiration from other people, but also as our daily practice as artists, we want to invent, we want to create, we want to protect the things that we've created, and shout out when we've been able to be inspired by some amazing artists as well. So thank you so much. Be on the lookout for our continued webinar series about this topic this fall, and enjoy the rest of the conference.